Hey guys, David Doucette here, Architect Exam Prep. Just wanted to give you a heads up, let you know that the ARE podcast is sponsored by Architect Exam Prep, and that is myself and Eric. If you need any study materials, head over to our website, architectexamprep.com. You can check out our materials there. And also, if you need coaching, we offer that as well, whether you need it for one division or you want to jump all the way in and join our Platinum Coaching Program. You'll find all the information on our website, architectexamprep.com. With that said, let's get into the podcast. ARE Podcast, episode number 54.
Welcome to the ARE Podcast. Where it's all about encouraging and inspiring you today so you can fulfill your dream of becoming a licensed architect tomorrow. And now your host, David Doucette.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the ARE Podcast. Today, we have another micro podcast, which are our short 10-minute podcast, hyper-focused about a specific topic, and getting Eric and I to do something in under 10 minutes is a challenge, but we're going to do that. So without further ado, I'm going to throw it to Eric. What do we have for today?
Our micro podcast topic today is that studying is not like exercise. You can't just do it and expect results.
So does that mean I have to get a gym membership to now study? Is that what you're saying?
No, it means we have a lot of people that call us or chat us through the website and give this same story, which is, I don't understand. I've studied and studied and studied, 3 hours a night, every night for the last 2 months, and I still didn't pass. What's going on? And the point is, you can't just read these things and expect to pass. The test is ultimately not about your ability to memorize. The test is ultimately about your ability to show that you have proper judgment. And so studying alone is not enough. You have to really essentially do work on the day of the test. You have to make, judgments on the day of the test. And so studying it's not like exercise. You can't just do it and expect to pass.
It seems like it's only half of the equation, the studying, right? We have to have the knowledge, which is what we gain through the studying. And I like to say, but the wisdom is what we need on exam day to be able to apply that knowledge to the questions on exam day and being able to read them correctly, which we know is an ongoing challenge for every candidate. In terms of the amount of hours we're putting in, so what you're saying is, and what you're hearing is, if I put in 2 hours every day, 6 days a week, religiously for 2 months, I build up this expectation that I am now entitled to pass the exam because I put my time in. And then when that doesn't happen, now I get disappointed. Is that kind of what we're talking about? Yeah,
and not only that, not only do you get disappointed, but for a lot of people, it's an ego blow. They think it somehow reflects on their ability as an architect or a designer, and then they'll take a year off from the test, which is just a shame, So it doesn't work that way. Really, if you think about it, you've been preparing for these tests your entire life. You went to architecture school, you worked in the field. Studying is really making the connections and filling in the gaps in your knowledge. That's really how you should view studying. Yes, you'll learn a few new things along the way. You'll also learn things that you had forgotten that you had learned. But more importantly, you'll really find ways to make connections between these different disparate ideas and be able to show and demonstrate proper judgment on the day of the test.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you right, you're telling me now as the candidate here, you're telling me that I don't need to study 2 hours every day because it doesn't matter. That's what I'm hearing. Help me out here, because now you're making me feel like I don't need to study, because what's the point?
Well, there are cases where there are candidates that really don't need to study, but I think for most candidates, you do need to study. My point is not that you don't need to study. My point is that studying alone is no guarantee of success on these tests. You have to study to fill in the gaps in your knowledge, but more importantly, you have to be clear in your judgments. For example, if you've memorized, our study guide on what it says about CAV systems versus VAV systems versus single duct versus double duct. And congratulations, you've memorized that page because you studied so hard. All of that will be useless if you don't know how to choose, which project is appropriate for a CAV single duct system versus which is appropriate for a VAV double duct system. See what I mean? So all the memorization, all the cramming, all the studying in the world will not help you pass this test unless you can demonstrate proper judgment on when to use each system, material, or detail.
Okay, then the next question, let me follow up here as devil's advocate. Where do I get this judgment? How do I learn judgment? Like, what course can I take for judgment?
Oh gosh, we get that all the time, right? People, we'll go through questions with people and they'll say, well, how am I supposed to know that? And I'll say, well, know what? And they'll say, well, how am I supposed to know that that the fire damper would belong in the duct that penetrates the fire separation? Where show me where that is in the Architect's Handbook of Professional Practice. What page number am I going to find that? I'm like, you're not going to find that in a book. You're going to have to kind of essentially assemble all of this in your mind of these things that you learned in different bits, in different order, through different experiences, and you'll start to make those connections. And what we do in our study materials, for example, is at the end of every chapter, we have this thing called Mindset Matters that's deliberately there to help you make those connections. So that's how we do it in our study materials. I don't know what other people do in theirs, but you're going to need to exercise some common sense. And I think a lot of candidates are realizing that they might not have that much common sense, and they're the ones that tend to struggle with the questions and reading the questions the most.
And that's where we get into, obviously, mindset and anxiety can grossly inhibit our judgment on exam day. It's like for the California supplemental exam, the California Architects Board, their test plan, they call them knowledge statements. And as I was just saying, and it kind of reminded me again of that point, the knowledge statements is the information. And that's what you can, ascertain from our guide and the exam simulator and whatever else. That's the knowledge. It's the wisdom, right? It's the judgment that you then have to take that knowledge and apply it successfully on exam day. And you do that by reading the questions correctly, looking for clues and the clue words, keywords, all of that. But again, knowledge is not enough. And as you're saying, Eric, it's not enough to just kind of go to the gym. You have to know what to do with it, right? You have this wealth of information in your head. You now have to know what to do with it. And that's kind of the beauty of 5.0, actually, and one of the differences between 3.0 and 4.0. We kind of have to know what to do with all this information in our brain. It's not enough for it to just be there.
Yeah, for example, there's a sample question, and it goes something like this, and we do this in the coaching, right? So we run people through this question, and it basically says something along the lines of, which of these spaces belongs on the west side of the house? It's a pretty simple question. And the options are living room, family room, bathroom, or dining room, I think, right? And the answer is dining room. Why? Because on the west side of the house is where the sunset is. And if you're dining, you'd want to watch the sunset. Those other rooms don't necessarily need to be on the west side of the house where you're going to get a lot of sideways glare in the afternoon. It's a very straightforward question, looking for a straightforward answer. And candidates have said to us in the coaching program, where in the book do I find that dining rooms belong on the west side of the house? And the answer is nowhere. I doubt you're going to find any study materials that say, if you happen to get a question about which rooms belong on the west side of the house, the answer is dining room. But yet that's what they're looking for. They're treating this like almost like a geography test. I just want to cram and memorize. And I've done my job. I've studied 3 hours a day for 4 months straight, and they still don't pass. And they wonder why. It's because studying itself is not like exercise. You're not just going to get results just by studying and cramming. You need to start to make connections.
And this is a process, and we say that all the time. This entire thing is a process. You're not going to hit a home run the first time out. You might fail 3 times before you get, a successful pass. And you tweak it each time, and that's part of the process. So you learn a little more each time. So now, right, just by what you said, I now know as a candidate that the dining room, right, should go on the west side because of the sunset, right, or facing west. That's information I have that I didn't have 5 minutes ago. So we kind of just continue to collect these little scenarios, not specifically looking for a dining room on the west side of the house question, but just the concept of a room situated on the west side, and what does that mean? Or on the east side, or the north side, where it doesn't get any direct sunlight. That's kind of what we're getting at. That's the judgment we're trying to get across here.
Right. And if you take that question and you solely just memorize, okay, dining room goes on the west side, and that's all you've gotten out of that, then when you get a question that says, well, which of these spaces belongs on the east side? And the answer is breakfast nook, and you're not able to make that connection, then all the studying in the world is not going to fix that. You need to be able to make that connection, right? You need to interpolate and extrapolate that information. So the question's asking deliberately about light from a specific direction. What functions are going to benefit from that direction? That's really what you should get out of this. And you already know that the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. And so it's just one step removed. And that's what candidates struggle with. They lack that one step of connection between the data that they've been memorizing and the actual application of the knowledge to demonstrate judgment.
It's the classic saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for dinner, teach a man to fish and you feed him for life. Like, that's kind of what we're talking about here, right? It's this is not about finding any one answer on the exam. And as we've joked about before with the at-home testing and the rigorous sort of requirements of that, because they don't want you to cheat, which is valid, but this is not really a cheatable exam. Having your notes open, for example, while taking the exam is probably not going to help you.
Yeah, a lot of people say that to us. They're like, even if I had all the books open, I wouldn't have been able to pass. It's like, okay, then clearly you're missing the whole point of the test. Stop treating it like a high school test, right? You're not being tested on, I always say, geography, right? You're not supposed to just memorize the capitals. It's really a judgment test, and you're exercising bad judgment by just cramming and memorizing and not really making the connections.
And it's also gets into your expectations, and then just setting our expectations correctly, which, as a Zen sort of response would be have no expectations. That's your expectation on exam day, to have no expectations. Because when we do put in our hours and hours and hours of studying and we don't pass, that hurts, and that can spiral. And I took a couple of years off after my first exam. So it's just trying to manage your expectations to mean none, right? And then if you pass, great. But that also means if you don't pass, great. I just keep moving forward, and I'll take another, division in 2 months. So we're already at, I think, about 12 minutes. So let's keep this micro. So what is the last piece of advice on this topic that you have for us, Eric?
As you're studying, it's not about the time you're investing in the studying. It's about how much you're getting out of the studying. If you're going through the book and thinking to yourself, gosh, I already know this, then change up your strategy here. Really try to understand, are any of these topics fuzzy to me that I wouldn't be able to make a decision of when to use one over the other? Right? Really think about that and start to make those connections while you're studying. Connect the new knowledge that you're taking in with the stuff that's already in your mind, and suddenly you'll start to see much more benefit and result from all that time invested.
All right. Sounds good. On behalf of Eric, my name is David, and we will see you guys on the next ARE podcast.
Thanks for listening to the ARE podcast. Be sure to visit architectexamprep.com and check out our other podcast episodes, video tips, and the ARE blog. Remember to plan, practice, and pass.